Right, carry on assembling this shutter. So here's the pallet wheel. We have the sector gear that drives the pallet wheel, and I'll just apply a bit of molybdenum paste to the tail of that where it catches. There's a latch that holds that in the cocked position. I'll just put a touch of molybdenum paste on there. Drop that into position. That's better. And it has a spring that powers that wheel. Hook that over the post, stretch it out, latch it into position in the hole in the arm. Check that that moves correctly. As I move the blade actuating ring, it releases that and it all powers down just as it should. So now the flash control stuff. Got this little arm here, sprung loaded. You've got to get that spring back against the inside of the case, and with a bit of magic it just clicks into place. That's one of those tasks that when you've done it 1,000 times, everything just falls into place. But if you try and explain exactly how you do it, it's tricky. So I'll just cock that. Get this arm in position. Now all these components I've previously cleaned, so I can assemble this quickly and continuously. See if I can pick up the spring, flip it over the right way. That spring's a little bit odd shaped. We'll see if it'll work. It looks like it's been bent down at the end. It may or may not work. We'll find out. Make sure that the spring runs around the shoulder on that screw, doesn't get trapped underneath it. That's good. Tighten that screw, that screw. Now swing that spring into position. Little notch in the back of the arm that spring hooks into. Just checking that moves freely. That's good. Right. That little arm acts as the latch that holds the main cam in place. So I just run a bit of molybdenum paste down that edge, because that's where the latch comes into place. The shutter release lever can go in place. I just wipe a bit of paste, molybdenum paste, on the shaft of that, because that's what I've got in my hand. Get this in place. It's got to go underneath the tab on the B lever. Get the spring tucked in down the side of the case. And check that that moves smoothly. That's good. What's next up here? Right. I want to get the control stuff in here for the self timer and flash sync settings. So I'd lubricate that little detent spring there on the inside of the case. And having the control lever here for the self timer, I'll just run a bit of molybdenum paste over those little ratchet teeth there. and fit this in place. The pin must go behind that spring that you can see through the hole there, so at that end. Check that that's seated correctly, it all looks good. The shim goes on next. And the aperture setting lever, which just fits over a peg on the back of the control for the apertures. There's 3 small screws. The screwdriver is magnetised, so it makes it awkward getting screws started sometimes. There we go, that's done. And lucky last, need to check that that lever moves freely. That's good. Right, back into the shutter itself. There's the main drive cam hidden. Over here, bring another container of pieces over. There's the main drive cam there. I'm taking molybdenum paste again. Quick wipe through the centre. You need very little there. On that curved surface in particular, I want to get some on there. And those 2 arms where it's going to contact the blade actuating ring. Swing that back to the rest position. I have our main drive spring, and I was able to find a better example. It was a little bit tired looking, by no means terrible as these things go. But this one's got a little bit more tension to it. And get that spring clipped into place. So now if I cock the shutter, it'll fire. That all looks good. I can put the retard gear train in place now. So I'll cock the shutter again. The retard gear train has been cleaned. And lubricated with graphite powder. Just make sure this lever is not trapped on top of the blade actuating ring. It should be sitting behind the tab on the blade actuating ring. As the blade actuating ring comes back, it lifts that arm, effectively disconnecting the action of the retard gear train. Okay, so that's in place. Let's see what sort of a speed we get if I release the shutter. Sounded probably slightly fast, but at least it ran down smoothly. Next, the self timer, or the delay action. Well, that dropped into place nicely without a fight. A single screw locates this. That's running down nice and smoothly. That's good. We have this little pinion gear. I'm just going to put a wipe of molybdenum paste on the shaft of that, and I've used very little of that. You just need the tiniest smear, and the curved sort of internal cocking rack, this thing, run some around the inside edge and around the outside edge, and that's all that's required. I'll hook this into position. The end of that spring has to hook over that post. And the spring is rotated slightly, so it's not in the best orientation to get that over the top of that post. Right, swing that into position. Now look at the position of the teeth there. You can see that the first tooth on this cam, this little pinion, drops into the first groove there, and that's the correct position. Make sure that the tab on the retard gear or the self timer is behind this little tab here, and all should be good. I'll put the speed settings cam plate on there now, and this, I just want to run some molybdenum paste through the centre, and on these positions, if we put this into place, this position, that should give me an 1/8 of a second. Let's see what we get. Sounds slightly fast. What's the 15th sound like? Possibly fast. I'm going to go and check those on the tester, but I'll just put the retainer ring on the front first, because that will hold all this together while I'm testing it. And I'll let you know what I find out. Most definitely about half a stop fast, so I need to move the speed train in, the retard gear train in, slightly for greater engagement with the main cam to slow it down. So just cock this, slacken that screw off slightly, move the cam in very slightly, the speed train rather, and tighten that screw back up. And see what we get. The adjustments are pretty subtle, so it could easily be too fast or too slow. That doesn't sound too bad. I'll go and test that again. I'm confident that I did move that. At about half a stop too fast. That's still too fast. Let's have another go. I think when I tightened the lock screw up that it effectively shifted that screw across and undid my good work when I moved it. Oh, that sounds better. I'll go and test that. Back shortly. That was exactly on the money. So, we can carry on and close this up. This little lever stops you being able to depress the shutter if the shutter's not cocked. Get this spring hook behind its post, doing its best to get away at the moment. That's it. Put the retainer on there again. Let's check the self timer while we're at it. That certainly runs down nicely. I'll get the screws here in the case, we'll get the shutter case on. So first I've got to start with the curved rack and the pusher that it pushes along. I'll just rub some molybdenum paste on those, drop them into place. Cock the shutter. And fit the outer case in place. Check that the flash contact drops into the slot there. See if I can get that sitting a bit flatter, because it doesn't sit very flat at the moment. That's better. There are 3 screws that hold all this in place. One of them was missing, but I was able to scavenge one from a part shutter. And the screw on the side here just clamps our flash contact. Just run that in lightly, doesn't need any more than that. And at the front of the shutter we can start putting the control rings back in place. This piece couples our aperture settings dial to the aperture setting itself. I'll just run some molybdenum paste around there and fit that into here. It doesn't require much in the way of lubrication. I'll fit this on the shutter. The tab here must couple into the fork here. And the ring couples to the shutter speed settings cam plate with that tab there, and this little detent drops into another notch. Just checking that's all moving nicely, appears good. The ring with our aperture numbers on it has a little notch in the bottom which couples to that plate right there. There's a little tab that sticks up, so that drops into place there. I can remove that retaining ring. We have the front ring here that holds, this is the lens mount, it's where the lens bayonet's into. I'm just taking some molybdenum paste and running it around those detents there. It doesn't need much. That's almost always pretty well greased up with graphite grease when you get the shutter apart. It's a bugger to clean it all away, but they used to be exceptionally generous with it. I'm not sure why. So I'll run this retaining ring in place. I'm checking the feel of this. You should have positive click stops, but if it's stiff then you've over tightened this ring. Just check that position there. You can set this in multiple places so you can get it where the feel of it suits you. I'll say that that's right, I think. Now there's a tiny retainer screw, lock screw for that retaining ring. I'll get that in place. Oh, another magnetised screwdriver. What have I done to deserve this? That screw's awkward to get in position, mostly because it's exceptionally short. You've got probably about a turn of thread, if that. Okay, well that's all looking good. That shutter really just needs the lens put back in place now. So our lenses. Put the front unit in place. Make sure you get your red dots lined up when you go to fit that back, otherwise you're not going to enjoy it. Our rear group screws straight in the back. And those lenses only needs to be finger tight. Now we can fit the shutter back to the body. So getting that, oh hang on, where's my shim rings? I better put them in place. There's the two rings, one paper, one metal. I normally put the paper one back against the shutter because it makes it easy to get this in place without damaging the paper shim. The shutter should fit into place, and we'll see if the shutter will cock. It does. I was listening there to hear the sound of the cams dropping into place, the latches dropping into place in the shutter, telling me that the shutter had cocked at or before the point where the film advance lever had finished its advance stroke. I'll just run that retainer ring up finger tight. Check again. That's good. That all works as it should do. So I'll tighten up that retainer ring. I'll just check the focus, make sure that's still correct. I expect it will be, we haven't disturbed anything there. And then we have a final finish up and clean up. Well, that focus wasn't quite correct. I'm just going to remove the metal shim and check that again and see how it behaves and adjust accordingly. The focus wasn't quite going back, wasn't going all the way to infinity, which tells me that the lens and shutter assembly wasn't going back far enough into the camera. Since we know we had the focus helical correctly assembled, it's easiest to adjust it by removing shims as required. Just adjusting the stroke of the release shaft so that the film release and the shutter release at the same point in its travel. They do not. The film release was releasing early. Let's see how we go. Still releasing the film, release early. So I need more of a turn there. I might remove that so I can get to this easily. In fact, I might remove the meter so I can get to it even easier. I think I need at least a full turn, and it's awkward to get at. Where's a decent screwdriver when you want one? Now I gave that one full turn, which is quite a lot. Let's see how that behaves. Yeah, and it wants more than that. Let's give it another quarter of a turn. That screw's unusually tight there. Let's put a meter back in place so that the shutter release button is guided as it normally would be. Put the top cover in place. Check again. It's released the film release before it released the shutter. So I want more. Gave that another quarter of a turn. That screw's unusually tight. It means either the thread on the screw is damaged or the thread in the shaft of the film release lever is damaged. It may have been crushed up tight. Perhaps it had worked its way loose previously and someone had squashed the tube down in order to make it tighter. It doesn't really matter as long as you can adjust it. Let me try again. Now I'm listening to see if I hear the film release clicking before I get the shutter release. That appears to be good. Okay, so any last specks of dust I need out of the finder before I put the top on for good? No, I think that's it. Put the correct screws in the correct place. We should be in business. The final adjustment of the position of the screw on the release shaft can often only be made once the shutter's been fitted back and the screw tightened up, because you always get a certain amount of movement on the shutter potentially, and you could tighten it in within a small range. And if it's at one end of its potential travel, then the point will differ than if it's the other end of its potential travel, the point at which the release will happen. But that's all good, that's working nicely. And this camera, which now is a nice Retina 3C, neat and tidy, leatherettes not flapping, no longer a huge mass of pimples on the back, clear rangefinder, nice shutter that cocks and fires correctly, everything good, exposure meter's good. As for accuracy, no, I haven't checked that, it doesn't look very accurate to me. But at least it moves, that's the main thing. It reacts to light. There's no loose connections. The glass on the top of it is glued back in place. The follower needle here moves freely. It's as good as it's going to be. And this little Retina 3C camera, which is now 65 years old or something, can be going back to its owner. Thanks for watching.